Jenny Johnson, who needs no introduction at all.
With this crowd, I might.
It is traditional in crypto to ask what we call your rabbit hole story. And so this is, when did you first hear about crypto and digital assets? But not you personally, you as a CEO, and how did you think about it, and how did you fall down that rabbit hole, taking your organization with you?
So
kind of the aha moment.
Yeah, so just a quick background. So my grandfather started Franklin Templeton, so I'm also in the family business. We're a public company, but we still have a big portion of it. So I'm third generation, and we're a $1.7 trillion asset manager. We do public, private, and we have clients in 160 countries, so really global. So I actually came up through the ops and tech area. So I first heard about this blockchain thing, and it was all about being able to have a single source of truth. One of the biggest issues you have running a IT department is actually the quality of your data and knowing kind of where it is and the latency of data. I always tell people, don't let the tech guys scare you. All they're doing is moving data around. And so you suddenly had this technology that people were talking about that had one single source of truth that was always up to date. And the amount of money that TradFi firms spend on reconciling data between their own systems, and then when you do a transaction, you have to go reconcile that data with your counterparty, is just a huge cost in the system. And so I was like, oh, that's really cool. And then they were like, yeah, but it's very slow. It's totally slow, and don't worry. So actually, it's been thrown back at me a bunch of times. I was like, no, this is really great, but it's not my problem. It's my grandchildren's problem, right? Like, they won't use it. It won't evolve that quickly. So that was kind of the first. And then it was really a group, as often happens within the firm, that are kind of leading, sort of entrepreneurial pushing, saying, no, you should pay attention to this. And so at that point, it was probably around 2018, and we started to think, well, actually, this could be pretty interesting to try to launch a tokenized money market fund. And that was probably the beginning of those discussions in there. And so we almost did little pockets of things. So one was, all right, we're in the money market business. If this could make it more efficient and cost effective, that could be pretty interesting. And then the other thing, we actually had a fund that bought consumer loans that were peer-to-peer loans being generated. And so we went to Mike Cagney, who many of you may know through Figure, and said, we want to buy your loans. And he said, all right, great, but I'm doing it on blockchain, so it'd be really helpful if you be a node validator. I'm not sure, I certainly didn't know what that was, but our team did. We said, all right, fine, we'll be a node validator. And today, I think we validate on something like 13 different chains. And so we started to do that. And as you got into it, little by little, you started to say, wow, there's something really here. And so, as often cases, you started out with almost little pilots and then start to realize, no, this is significant.
Yeah, but I want to dig into that a little more, because you maybe were, you were so early. And I think people in the audience now, and especially as this will be recorded, are going to want to know, how do we move our organization forward in the way that, because, nobody was as early as you. Nobody substantial was as early as you. And so let me first ask you a quick org chart question. Where did this sort of entrepreneurial group, how did they report directly into you? Or how did you make sure that you had some line of sight to these innovative ideas?
So interesting, I was not CEO at that point. I became CEO in 2020, 3 weeks before the lockdown. I think I was probably co-president. I don't remember if the group came out of actually an investment team. And they either reported to me then or they reported to me soon after. And so more of what I was doing was blocking and tackling to make sure you cleared the way. I always say, if you're a big organization, anybody who's worked in a big organization knows how hard it is to get change. And if you run an IT department, your number one issue is never your technology. Your number one issue is change management within the firm. And it's never the tech guys, because they're already in it. All of you are that small percentage of people who love to try new things. But actually, most of the world is not like that. They like what they do, and they don't want to invest in learning to change. And so this group was there. And so what I would do is would get them the budget, which was still pretty small, and honestly tell them to ignore the eye rolling that was going on through a lot of the rest of the firm of why are we even doing this? What a way, look at this crypto stuff. And then anytime you had like when FTX happened, anytime you had a blow up, it was, see, I told you so. We shouldn't be spending our money. And I looked at that as this is great because it means my competitors will justify their position for not being in it. It'll give us a longer runway in it. And so I always would say, oh, those little moments give you more long runway.
Right. So, but it matters if your head of marketing is eye rolling and versus your head of compliance or legal is eye rolling. So how did you? What were some of the? I mean, we're all aware of a lot of these obstacles get thrown at us, but was there anything there that kind of surprised you, or anything particularly difficult that you had to kind of find a creative solution to?
So I'd say it was akin. So I actually at one point in my career ran what we called e-business, and e-business. The definition was anything that had to do the internet was under me. Okay, so I was, and by the way, most people, if you're old like me, you'll remember that when the internet first came out, enterprises thought of the internet as a billboard, not as a communication channel. You just had to post like your contact information and your call center number, and you were good, and you didn't have to think about it again. So then I was taking on anything to do with the internet, and we were trying to start to make it a communication channel. I am, at that point, the daughter of the CEO. And I could not get the marketing department to write material that would be appropriate to be consumed on the internet. They'd say, you're good. We have the PDFs. It's a 7-page, brochure. That's fine. Just use that. And so that's what I mean by that change management. And even if you're in charge, the resistance that happens when people don't believe in the kind of the mission of it is really hard in organizations. And so, again, that's that insisting, blocking and tackling, almost letting them create their own sub-business unit. You have to give them their own salespeople, in some cases their own marketing people, because it is hard to get that. I say, like if you're growing a garden and it's filled with weeds and none of the nutrients can go to the plant you're trying to grow, it'll never work. So you have to protect it in those early stages. And to me, that's the only way if you're in a big organization, a traditional organization, that you're actually going to have this take hold. Or otherwise, you'll join late. And that'll be fine, but you won't get those first mover advantages.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about that first mover advantage in the competitive ecosystem. Because if you were making widgets and you got there first, and you could convince your internally, your organization, you're good, you're done. But finance, I like to think of finance as crochet. You look at the front of it, it's beautiful. But if you ever turn it over, it's like this absolute tangled mess.
Come on,
right?
We don't want people to know that.
So you can't move really without anybody else, partners
Right.
and customers. And so how do you kind of inch that along?
Well, so that's the hardest part of it, right? Which your point is, we don't trade with ourselves. We trade with somebody else.
Right.
And if nobody that we're trading with has wallets to be able to do this, it's really hard to get a hold of it.
Right.
Which has been interesting because what it's done is it's opened up actually a whole distribution channel that we didn't exist before. Partnerships that we're building with exchanges and with different firms because and just back for a second, when we decided to launch the tokenized money market fund, we were like, all right, let's go find a service provider who could build the shareholder record keeping system. This would be great. Well, it didn't exist. So fortunately, we then built the platform on the Stellar blockchain. I think now it's on, I'm looking at my team, like 11 chains, I think. But we had to build it ourselves, which was not something that you would normally, as an investment management firm, would have to think about. You just go to JP Morgan and other places to do it. Right. So the willingness to do that was really important. And to be honest, even today, it is just this year. This is why I think 2026 is going to be a different year, because finally our traditional firms and distribution channels are coming to us and saying, listen, now we got to deal with this blockchain thing. Could you talk to us, educate us on it? Whereas the only people we could talk about our Benji, our tokenized money market fund with were, DeFi firms who had wallet infrastructure and had the distribution and had people who were comfortable with it as a distribution channel, but none of them have the traditional products. So now we're talking about working with partners on tokenizing ETFs and other things because they're now trying to say, well, our clients want traditional products. The point was, you're exactly right. If you don't have the partner who is already built on the infrastructure. And look at banks, First thing they did was they said, listen, don't get comfortable with these public blockchains. This is really scary stuff. You should use ours. We'll do a private blockchain. Right. Like, why? Because they're toll takers in the system, and their business model is directly threatened by all of what this can do. And so the first thing they tried to do was say, we'll build it on ours. So when they'd come to us, they said, no, you got to work on our chain. Now, I think what's happened, and I love to use the example of the Ethereum, where they went from proof of work to proof of stake. And I say to people, like, so imagine you've got an IT project in a big business. It's your entire backbone of your business model. And you have to make a complete architectural change, right? Which is what, when Ethereum made that shift, that was a massive architectural change. And it got delayed, and there was splitting off and different things. But the weekend it happened. And every business who had built themselves on top of that, on Ethereum, got the benefit of a massive IT project without any cost to them. So how are you going to compete if you have to pay for that yourself? So that was one. Number two, when I say to people in businesses, oh, and by the way, there was no project manager. There was no team. It was a community coming together to achieve an objective, and it went off without a hitch. So to me, that's like should be a light bulb that if you think you're going to build your own private chain and compete, then you're going to have a hard lesson to you because you're not going to be able to compete with a community.
I think about always that Microsoft Encyclopedia project that was launched at the same time as Wikipedia. And like you can't compete with
You can't compete.
All of these, yeah.
Value of the crowd.
Yeah. And of course, you had a secret weapon in Sandy Call.
I have and continue to have a secret weapon in Sandy Call.
She did so. Podcasts and appearances and conferences, just kind of spreading the word. And you Franklin Templeton has really evolved as like the bridge, honestly, between our community and the traditional finance community. You're credible with both ecosystems now, and so you serve such an important, I think, ambassadorial role both ways. So tell me a little bit about the incoming.
Well,
is it?
Well, what I find so funny, because I've been speaking at crypto conferences for a few years now, and I would always be amazed at the size of the conference. And then you'd go to the TradFi world, and it was literally like two parallel universes that didn't talk to each other. And the TradFi would dismiss it as its niche. It's not going to really, it'll die out. And the crypto guy would be like, they'd be like, look at my $1 billion. I made $1 billion now, And so it is literally this year where I feel like there's starting to be enough demand on the TradFi side to say, we need to address this. We need to figure out.
Yeah.
And then also on the DeFi side, where those who have, if you put Kraken and, OKX and the different exchanges, Coinbase and others, they have these massive client relationships that they now want to offer traditional products on. So they're coming to the TradFi world looking for more traditional types of things because in the end, you want to be able to provide your client choice. And so it's just an interesting thing because I really think it's starting to come together in a way. Now, I have to say, because we do, we have teams that run equity portfolios, I would always say to our teams, you have to be careful. If you're doing an evaluation on a company that is and you're looking at the competitors of the company and you're trying to see how it's performing in the traditional public markets, and you're not paying attention to the DeFi world because over here there will be disruption to the business model. So you're limited in the business model in the public world, and there may be something coming here to disrupt. I mean, I look and I'll use examples like Helium with being able to resell some of your internet exposure, and that they have a huge waiting list. I haven't kept up on it, so I'm assuming they still have a waiting list. Like if you're evaluating internet service providers and you're not paying attention to this new model where the client is essentially becoming almost part of your IT department by being able to supply that bandwidth, like you're not actually looking at the entire universe of it. And so I think that for equity analysts, they have to be paying attention to the business models that are being created here in DeFi.
Yeah, and some exciting things happening with 00 and other kind of infrastructure companies now. But can I ask you then, what is kind of what's coming across your desk now? If we now look forward and we think about your positioning, but also just like from your vantage point, what have any opportunities surprised you, or what are you hearing and demanding from your customers?
So let me talk for a second about our tokenized money market fund.
Okay.
So, what it's been able to do is to provide efficiencies. Now, let me first talk about cost efficiency. If you know our business, it's constantly fees, fees, fees. Fees are only going one way. There's pressure on it, right? So when we went to the SEC to get the money market fund approved, they required us to parallel process on our blockchain transfer agency system, shareholder record keeping system, and our traditional one. And actually, we did run 4 transfer agency systems kind of globally. It was kind of Fidelity and Franklin, which were the only ones who were still doing that. So we actually were able to run these parallel. And by the way, as I pointed out to my team, the first time anybody in the regulatory environment ever asked what the programming language was for the transfer agency system was only when it was on blockchain. Wow. Like nobody ever asked it before. Right. Suddenly they cared about the programming language, right?
That's amazing.
And so we ran it parallel, and it was like 6 or 8 months, and I think we did about 50,000 transactions, and the transactions cost us about $1.50 each out of pocket. It was $1.50 to run those transactions. The entire 50,000 were what, $1.13 total cost. Now, part of that was like, so remember, 50,000 times $1.50 and $1.13. So that was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? This different. Now, that we picked Stellar, that was the right chain for what we were trying to accomplish. And I often tell people, like, you got to pick the right chain for whatever your goals are. So that was really, really important. And so then we were able to, with our traditional money market fund, it costs $500. Your minimum purchase is $500. And the blockchain, it's $20. We could even go lower than that. But think about when we all talk about financial inclusion, like that's amazing that you can suddenly make it cost effective at that price. But then the other things are, we pay and post the yield every day in the account. And the only reason is because we're natively on chain. Most of the other money market funds are digital twins, so they shadow, which means when a traditional mutual fund closes at 4 p.m. on Friday, it doesn't open until Monday morning. And so you can't actually transact during the weekend or after. But because we're natively on chain, we can transact at any time. And what we can do is we can post the yield every day. Now, you're still getting the yield in the other money market fund, but guess what? From an engagement with your client, we first thought, well, that's cool. Like my daughter, I was telling the story about I pre-funded her wedding in the account and said, anything you save is yours, but you go over, it's on you. She goes, Mom, I'm getting yield every day in my account. I get it posted, like I get money every day. That was like, from an engagement standpoint, pretty cool. But you know where it's really getting interesting? So your point on surprising is if you're a corporate treasurer, right, and you've got to move money around, actually when you have capital requirements, what you get posted in your account matters. You don't need to wait until the end of the month when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that can help you with your collateral actually matters. And so we're finding these opportunities with just some, what might have just felt like kind of cool little features that actually are going to really matter. And so then the other thing it opens up is anybody like a hedge fund, maybe who needs to post collateral, for partial part of the day, you wouldn't have gotten paid that collateral. We calculate the collateral every second. So you own our money market fund for 4 hours, 32 minutes, and 22 seconds, you're going to get paid for that. So think about where this ultimately goes. Now, if you're in TradFi, you roll your eyes and go, yeah, but do people really need it? Well, we didn't need the iPhone until it was given to us and we started to realize, oh my gosh. Right. And none of us understood when we got the iPhone that it was going to be much more than a cool camera, telephones, and music, and maybe a flashlight. And it was when they unlocked the imagination of people who could build businesses and suddenly you could download them easier. That's the same thing going on here, right? Which is we don't know yet all those capabilities, but you already start to see the excitement when you start to understand. As you unlock these, then the imagination starts to take off. So I think that's been the cool thing is realizing what this will do when you start to put traditional finance on 24/7, 365 days.
And that's during good times. I mean, I looked after the public sector franchise for JP Morgan during the global financial crisis. So I'm talking about like central bank clients calling me, how much collateral do I have? What's in our repo agreement? Like, I'm like, you don't
How do you not know that?
this?
Yeah.
How do you
Yeah.
not know this? But the transparency that you can give to a client that, can be smart and in a crisis and obviously in a wallet-based infrastructure have a bit more control over an understanding of what assets are in their control.
I was going to add one other thing that I think we are only beginning to unlock and see, which I think is going to be transformational, is the smart contract components, where and you add AI to it, and so the creativity that people are ultimately going to come up when they realize you can just program this in and it acts on its own, and then you add agentic to AI to it. I think we're going to get new types of investment products, new types of business capabilities that are going to get really interesting, that are going to be fueled by this technology. The reality is, whenever you roll out a new technology, it takes years before people's imagination catches up with those capabilities. And to put that in context, for the last decade, US productivity was running about 1%. We finally broke through. It's running about 2.5% now, and none of it has to do with AI. It is all technologies, cloud services, other things that were rolled out 20 to 30 years ago that finally get absorbed into people's operating systems. And so, again, things like this smart contract capability being tied to people's ownership and rights, and you add AI to that, it's going to be really fun to watch.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing.
Scary, but fun.
Yeah. So let me ask you, do you still have to run the parallel thing?
No, they only made us do it for, it was like 6 or 8 months. What was actually funny, one of the problems we had is that, your old mainframe, that was literally what we were running, I think, the old system on, you were limited to, I think, 8 decimal points. Well, of course, you put it on blockchain. And so you're always out of balance because the blockchain system was way more accurate.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, so as you think kind of about going forward in 2026 in particular, we have a much more, of course, benign regulatory environment in the United States. We had a lot of action talking about clarity even just yesterday and the day before. Do you any kind of crystal ball sort of things, not just about including, but not just about regulation in terms of what we might look like a year from now? Or
look, I think what's going to happen with stablecoins and payments. I mean, that is the first sort of thing that is the most obvious use cases. And
talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I think that, and it's interesting because those who are following the Genius Act and some of the regulatory environment in the U.S., there's this big debate: should stablecoins pay yield? And look, there's a fundamental concern in financial systems. Stablecoins pay yield. Who's going to keep their money in a bank? Right? And so, and in the US, you have a bifurcated system where if you pay yield, you're a security and you have different laws. And if you don't pay yield, you're a bank deposit, essentially. So I think there needs to be a little bit more clarity. Other jurisdictions don't have some of that same use. I think in the US, it is really imperative that they keep those two things separate, or else they have to bring together their own regulation. But as long as the regulation, you can't have regulation arbitrage. That becomes a disruptive force in worlds. But that needs to continue to play out. But I think on the stablecoin, and the payments, you already see it. I was talking to Caroline Pham from MoonPay today, and some of the interesting things about how you can pay with crypto online. Like, that stuff's all going mainstream.
Yeah.
And so I think the adoption is going to be much greater. And listen, I mean, even Jamie Dimon's changed his tune on all this stuff. He's trying to kind of figure it out. And he did say to me at one point, well, Jenny, because I said, look, stablecoins are going to affect people's, how much they're going to keep in their bank deposits. And he said, we provide ATMs and other services. And I thought to myself, of my 5 children, I'm trying to remember the last time they went to an ATM.
So, you talk to them with emails?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's very, you never know exactly where but have you had any kind of customer client requests that got ahead of you, that you sort of were, because you've always been sort of thinking and bringing, I think, customers and clients and partners with you. And what's been demand driven for you? Because what I think is interesting is when we all sort of first started talking about tokenization, at least from my perspective, it was going to be the illiquid assets that would be tokenized first, of course, because they're illiquid. What an opportunity. But it was not the illiquid assets. It was the assets that were already liquid that started. And you think back, it's obvious when you think.
Well, it's obvious because, by the way, they're illiquid. Just because you tokenize them doesn't make them liquid, right? You still need supply and demand. You still need buyers and sellers, and you need market makers, and they don't exist in the system. By the way, a great opportunity, which is market making on those real world assets that are illiquid, because there is demand for those. They're just like in the old securities industry. You had to create market makers. That is what the exchanges did originally, and we don't have that yet, and so that slows down, I think, the acceptance of that.
Yeah.
It's not the technology that's slowing it down.
Yeah. But as you think about your client base, what are they screaming at you for?
Well, again, our client base, we were much more front-footed in saying you should care about this. I mean, Sandy does. For those who don't know Sandy's background, anybody who was in the wealth business or the asset management business went to Sandy Call for the quintessential report on what is the future of it for the last decade plus. She interviews, I think in her annual report, interviews people who control 30 trillion plus in assets, 60 trillion, it's a big number, in assets to get kind of their understanding and things. And it was Sandy who just became passionate about, I see where this is going. By the way, she was one of the first people to call ETFs as going to be incredibly disruptive. And so what's happening is Sandy is now educating our traditional. They're in that a little bit of the education stage, but now they care. Now they realize they need to care. And then, as I mentioned, I think the DeFi firms that have clients, have wallets with clients, are also recognizing. There's a lot of them who are talking about, should we have banking services? Should we have, offer investment products in there? And so this is why I think there's the convergence is starting to happen. Both sides are wary of the other side. We comfortably play in both, and so I think that gives us a really nice position.
Yeah, if you're sitting in this room and you don't know who Sandy Call is, you should be ashamed of yourself. You need to leave, exit stage left. Okay, so where's the organization now? Is everybody kind of all in, or how? For us, it's the world. For you, how much of your world is it? And
There's no way, no. I mean, the team gets tremendous resistance in there, and that's why they're kind of carved out. Now, less so, suddenly, here's when it's starting to matter. When your sales force, who, by the way, a sales guy is going to sell what's easy to sell. So they're going to sell what their clients are starting to ask them about. And so when your sales teams are starting to say, I need to understand this better. And that's what's starting to happen, is that because our traditional clients are starting to ask our sales guys, could you talk to me about this? And look, I think there was a aha moment when the Bitcoin ETFs took off, that it woke up the TradFi firms to saying, our customers care. Now, there's a lot of them who said, but that's all fine, we've done it in the ETF, we're done. We don't need 24/7. I talked to a huge platform in the US that has 24/7 trading, and the CEO said to me, 4.5% of our clients trade after hours. So I'm not sure that demand is there. Yeah, but the next generation doesn't think that way. Right. So you have to be able to kind of move ahead of where your customer is going to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part that is starting to happen.
If you think about the themes that we've explored so far, be it in general, moving an organization, having that vision thing, moving an organization, to positioning yourself now for the next evolution in digital assets and traditional finance, to dealing with traditional financial partners, what you have to say to people that want to be like you.
I mean, well, first of all, I have to tell you, one of the things that stresses me out, keeps me up, I have such fear that we're going to be the mouse sitting in the Xerox R&D lab when Steve Jobs walks through and says, I want to have access. Right? I don't know if you guys know that story, but Xerox had the mouse for a decade before they ever figured out how to commercialize it. And Steve Jobs, they made an investment in Apple, and part of his deal of the investment was, I get access to anything in your R&D lab. And so he's exploring the R&D lab, and he walks through and he goes, this is really cool. I want this, and then launches the Mac computer on it, right? And so how often, matter of fact, Oracle was built on a white paper that was done by other people, right? Like, so often you can have the ideas and not be the winner and commercialize. So, like, I would say even within our own firm, we have a pretty substantial team focused on this. People ask me the question, how'd you get your board to agree? I didn't get my board to agree. We were doing this on the side. It was enough of a budgeted funded that you didn't talk to the board about it because you didn't want the board to say, no, that's a waste of time. And when FTX blew up, I have VCs on my board who said, yeah, that good thing we stayed away from that area. Like we are justified in not being there. And so, a couple things. Like, I don't think we're sitting there and can declare success until you are really embedded and commercialized, and you have to be paranoid to be afraid that somebody can jump in after you. I think we have a really substantial runway, but jump in after you, if you don't get it right. So that's why I, as CEO, still spend a fair bit of time focused on this.
Okay, bullish or bearish?
Bullish on bearish of which part?
Just the future of digital assets.
Oh, totally bullish. No. I mean, look at it is going to take over financial. Blockchain is going to be the infrastructure of financial services. There's no question in my mind on that.
Okay, what a way to end, huh? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.